Throughout the years, many newcomers have made attempts to dethrone the top video game companies of the time. Some have been successful, others not so much. Back in the early 90s, Nintendo and Sega were at the top of their game. Companies, most notably NEC with their TurboGrafx, would try to assimilate Nintendo and Sega's audience, taking a piece of the pie and grabbing some valuable market share. But the overwhelming weight of their resources and marketing would ensure their hold on the home console video game market and prove too much of a challenge for potential newcomers. Another company that would attempt such a feat would be SNK. SNK stands for Shin Nihon Kikaku, which in English means New Japan Project. SNK started out creating standalone arcade games back in 1978. The company would create some fairly popular titles such as Vanguard, Ikari Warriors, TNK3, Guerrilla War, and POW. One thing that some SNK arcade games were famous for was the inclusion of the innovative 8-way rotary joysticks. These were joysticks that not only would let you move up, down, left, and right, but they would also twist clockwise and counterclockwise for 360 degrees of control. With their success in the arcades during the early 1980s, SNK would attempt to find new life with their games by porting them to various home computer systems. Their decision in 1985 to become a third-party developer for the NES would prove to be a profitable one. These 8-bit ports of some of their hit titles would go on to be just as popular as their arcade counterparts, and in some cases, even more so. With their games doing so well on the Nintendo NES, the company would go on to produce original content for the system in addition to porting their older arcade favorites. Since the company was doing so well with their games, they decided to take a greater leap and follow in the footsteps of other arcade giants and enter into the home console market with their very own system. However, SNK knew that in order to compete with the powerhouses of Nintendo and Sega, their system would have to be something different, something special, something that would separate itself from the pack and give it an edge over its competition. This would lead SNK to take one of the most unique approaches toward the home market in video game history. First, in 1990, SNK would rock the arcade industry by releasing their Neo Geo MVS arcade unit. This innovative device would allow an arcade owner to have one machine that contained various games that could be changed out with new titles at any time. Similar to Nintendo's PlayChoice 10 machine released 4 years earlier, instead of having to buy a whole new arcade machine, one would instead buy new game carts for this one unit. From a financial standpoint, like the PlayChoice, this was an arcade owner's dream. Purchasing new carts for the system would usually be less than half the price of purchasing a whole new arcade machine. Also, having the one MVS unit would take up less of their retail space. The MVS arcade machine was leagues more advanced than the PlayChoice 10 in every way, setting it apart from the aging Nintendo system. A variety of MVS units were released, some that supported just one game, but others with support for 2, 4, or even 6 games in a single unit. The first 4 games released for the MVS were Nom 1975, Magician Lord, Baseball Stars Professional, and Top Players Golf. 1 year later, SNK would release the Neo Geo AES home console to the masses. The system ran the exact same hardware as its MVS counterpart. This meant a person that played Fatal Fury on the MVS arcade unit could get the same exact game and experience once they purchased the game cartridge for the home console. The system launched with a retail cost of $599, which at the time was the most expensive home console anyone had ever seen. Not only was the console price high, but the AES games cost upwards of $200 per game. Because of its price tags, not many people would be able to afford the system. But like most things in life, you got what you paid for. The Neo Geo was released during a time when the biggest and best technology was not necessarily the standard or the more popular choice. The gaming industry was still considered a market aimed at children, and the Neo Geo was definitely not a children's toy. The Neo Geo AES was a serious piece of equipment, and it was marketed as such. It was a highly stylized and sleek design, and it was only available for sale at specialty locations or through direct order. Everything from the jet black professional look to the gigantic cartridges separated this system from the more toy-like systems of the time. The system boasted a processor running 12 MHz, about 3 times as fast as the Super Nintendo. Neo Geo had 65,536 colors available, with 4,096 available on screen at a single time. The SNES had about half as many colors available, with only 256 on screen at a time. The Neo Geo could have 380 on-screen sprites, while the SNES had 128. The Super Nintendo was slightly better in the area of sound, but when comparing these two, Neo Geo's capabilities dwarfed Nintendo's flagship system. The system was marketed as a 24-bit system, more than double of what was being offered at the time. In reality, though, it was an 8, 16, and 32-bit microprocessor unit. Another unique feature of the system was its cartridges. In the world of the NES, Super NES, and Genesis, most gamers were used to cartridges that were generally small. But when it came to the Neo Geo, the cartridges for the system were quite large. In comparison, approximately 2 SNES carts equal the size of one MVS cart. Not to mention that, but the carts actually had 2 PCB boards inside of them, rather than the one that was common in most home console cartridges. This was due to larger memory capacity and in some cases additional hardware. While some consoles like the SNES were touting that their games had 32 megs of memory, most Neo Geo games were 40 megs and above, with their largest games going over 700 megabytes in size, which is approximately the capacity of a CD. Because of the larger cart sizes, the cost to make the games were substantially more expensive, which led to the higher cost to the consumer. One new feature that had never been seen before was the inclusion of a memory card slot on the Neo Geo system. With this slot, a user could transfer their saved games between the AES and MVS arcade units. This concept would later be revisited by Nintendo, as a similar concept was used in arcade games such as NFL Blitz 99, where you could transfer your playbook to the arcade, and even with F-Zero AX, which would unlock cars from the arcade for use in the GameCube version. When you played a Neo Geo AES game, you knew that you were playing something different, something special. Something that, in all honesty, seemed like a dream, as you were playing a system that, in a world of Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES and Altered Beast for the Genesis, it simply felt light years ahead of what should be expected for the time. Some of the games for the Neo Geo system have the most breathtaking two-dimensional graphics you'll ever see. The attention to detail and art style of these games have stood for years as the most advanced and well-crafted, even by today's standards. Yes, it is true that the system titles were mostly fighting games, but for anyone who is a fan of fighting games, it is a dream system. With that being said, the system does have its share of shoot-'em-ups, sports, and action games that are also quite awesome.